God, let the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. I think most of us get to the point in our lives where we think we're not going to get everything right. We just are not. We're imperfect people. What we really want to do is get the big things right. We can live with some of the smaller things, but God, please help us to get the big things right. Our family, our life, what we can bring to the community, what we can make this world a better place. That's what we want. And it all begins with asking the right questions, which is inherently important in the gospel. Questions are everything. You can't find the right answer unless you ask the right question. So if you've ever been a parent and you had a child under the age of 4, you know how many questions on average they ask each and every day? Diana knows this, multiplies it by 2, right? You know how many a 4-year-old and under will ask? 73 questions per day. Usually starting with why, right? So, by the time they get a little older, they're going to ask so many questions about the time, 6, 7, 8, 9, somewhere in there. You know how many questions they've asked you? It's 40,000 questions. What I find so interesting, though, is it begins to taper off. Young kids have a plethora of questions. But as they grow older, they ask less and less. Why is that? Maybe it's because the school system says what we're really interested in is the answer, the correct answer. And we don't really value good questions, which I think is a shame. Because good questions lead to deeper knowledge. But the idea also, they don't feel like they have the questions to ask because they're not sure what questions to ask. They're focused on the answers themselves. Jesus is different. He asks questions over and over again. Who do you say that I am? Do you believe? Do you want to get well? Why do you say, Lord, Lord, and then not do what I say? He asks so many questions. In fact, he asks more questions of people than people ask of him. We have this sort of view that Jesus is the answer person, that all our answers, and that's true, but he also spends a great deal of time asking questions, getting us to think the deeper thoughts to find the better answers in order to live a better life. And I think in some part, that's where we get to in our lives. We just start to have to ask some tough questions. Why was I put on earth? What are the gifts that God has expected me to share? What am I supposed to do with my life? How am I going to handle conflict? What are the things that I'm going to learn, sometimes the hard way? What is it that I've learned in my life that really changed the way I think? If I weren't afraid, what would I actually do if I weren't so fearful of what the repercussions might be? You begin to ask these questions, and it leads you to a deeper understanding. So maybe one of the most important questions we can ask is this. Why did people so long ago make sure we were able to read this story? Why did they say, we're going to put this down because we don't want to forget and we want future generations to wrestle with this passage because we think it holds some eternal truth? And so Mark will tell you the story, what's happening with Jesus. Jesus is becoming very popular right now. Early on in Mark's gospel, he begins to have a reputation of a healer, a person who performs miracles, and people are just pressing in. He can't hardly even breathe. He can't go anywhere where the crowds. It gets to the point one time where he actually gets on a boat to go off the shore just because there are so many people. He is at least able to stand and talk to them, and he knows it's time that he needs to get away to recoup, to restore, and to refresh his soul. And even his own disciples are saying, we've got to leave, we've got to get away. The people are pressing in. They want so much of you, cannot even breathe. So where does he go? He goes to a place called Tyre or Tyre, however you pronounce it. And where is it? Well, it's 25 miles north, but it's beyond the border of Israel. It's near Beirut, Lebanon, if you want to look on a map today. But what it does is reminds us that Jesus is going to cross a boundary. He's going to go to a place outside of the norm. He's going to leave Israel behind and go to a place where there are foreigners there. So where is Tyre? It's on a map, but it's also the place where you go when you no longer want to be where you are. When you need to get away fast and get away as far as you can to recoup yourself. So he goes and leaves Israel. Disciples try to find a secret place in order for him to be alone and to have some time by himself. But before they know it, somebody else is beginning to knock on the door. It's a woman who has a daughter who is very ill. A demon is how they describe it. And she begs Jesus, hearing of his reputation, to come and help her daughter. And she will not leave. He tries to ignore it first, but she keeps pounding on the table. Finally, he invites her in. I don't know about you, but any good parent, any mother in particular, would go anywhere, anytime, any place to help a sick child. You've done that before, you would do that. There's nothing that you would not do. She begs Jesus. She humiliates herself. She puts herself, because it's not about her. She doesn't care what anybody thinks about her. All that matters is her daughter's sick, and she thinks Jesus can help. So she'll do anything, go anywhere in order to find that kind of help. That's what a good parent does. Did a funeral Friday for a man who passed away. He had a daughter. Her daughter is now on the heart transplant waiting list. When she was first diagnosed, they put her in the heart transplant area of the hospital, and he went to see her. And he said, you know, it's just this maze of hallways and tunnels. You've ever been downtown Fort Worth, you know this hospital. It's hard to sort of navigate. Finally, he finds his way into the heart transplant area. And there are signs posted away, absolutely no visitors. And he says, but I'm her father. Well, I'm sorry, no visitors are allowed beyond this point. Talks to the nurse. No, I'm sorry, you can't get by, I'm her father. Security guard comes, reaffirms the fact nobody's allowed past. No, you don't understand, I'm her father. I need to be with her, she needs to be with me. He begins to make enough right phone calls. Finally, somebody comes on the other side, opens the door, invites her in. And he said, I was not going to leave until I saw my daughter. That's what good parents do. That's what this mother is doing. My child is sick. I will do anything. Get on my knees and beg if I have to in order to get the help that he could offer and provide. And so the first thing that Jesus says is incredibly cruel. And I don't know how you see this passage. It's one that we actually avoid a lot. There are the things that we just sort of gloss over. But somebody said, we need to read this. We don't just want to read the parts that we particularly like or gravitate. Read the entirety of the gospel. Read the Bible itself. You're going to run across difficult passages. This is one, because it doesn't represent what we think Jesus is or would say or do. It just doesn't sound like him. So what do we make of it? Because what he says to a desperate mother, why should I give you the food that was intended for God's people? Why would I give that to you, a dog? That's right, he calls her a dog. And you can mollify that all you want, but that's what the story says, calls her a dog. It's a derogatory statement. Meaning, what do I have to do with you? Because the whole scenario says, I'm a Jew, you're a foreigner, you're a Samaritan, I'm a male, you're a female, I'm up here, you're down here. Why would I waste my time? I'm here for the people of Israel and only the people of Israel. You're not going to be a part of it. Maybe later, but not now. And it's this really hard conversation. So what do we make of it? Theologians for years have tried to unpack this, trying to say, how do we explain something that's really difficult to understand? That Jesus would say those particular words to a woman who was desperately in need of help for her daughter. So there's a number of strains of thoughts. One group of theologians have determined what he's really doing is testing her. Let's see how much faith you have. I'm going to knock you down, call you a dog, and I want to see how bad you want this. So he's testing her on her faith. Problem with that is Jesus, not a single instance we know of, ever did that to anybody. In fact, actually went the opposite way. He didn't make her beg for God's mercy. That's not the way Jesus normally does things. Second group of theologians would say to you, well, he kind of is playful. He's just using those words, and it's not really a dog, it's a puppy. Let's call it a puppy. That'll make us all feel better. And he's sort of doing wink, wink, smile. You know how this works. I'm a Jew, you're a Samaritan. I'm going to help you, but we kind of have to go through this little charade. Third strain of thought is to say, I'm coming to the Jews first, not the Gentiles, but that will come. It's just not your time right now. Well, the fourth one is the most controversial, because what it says is, in this moment, Jesus learns from her that he grows, that he evolves, that just sensing her need and not looking at a Samaritan, but looking at a woman who has a child, just like anybody else in this world would want God's mercy and the grace and healing. And he begins to think differently. He begins to widen the scope of his thought and ministry. It's not just Israel, it's to the entire world. It's to anybody who ever needs help and needs love and needs mercy. So the part of the problem is, we already know this, and it is indisputable. God sends Jesus to us. Jesus is both fully human and fully divine. And throughout the centuries, the church has always struggled with how to balance that. And there are times we make Jesus so divine, so perfect, so unapproachable, so unlike us, we can't relate to Jesus. And yet he's fully human. So in one turn, we make Jesus so divine, we can't relate to him. The other times, we make Jesus so human, he loses his own divinity, that he's just a good teacher. He's a wise man. None of that's true. He is the Son of God. He is fully divine and fully human. He knows what we go through. He knows what we feel. He knows when our hearts are broken. He knows what it feels like to have loss and grief and to be afraid. All those things are the human element inside of him. He came to be like us, to be one of us, so that we could be like him and to follow him. And I don't know why some people find such difficulty in finding the humanity of Jesus along with the divinity. Jesus clearly did things that are human. He cried. He was hungry. He was angry. His heart was broken. He hurt. He laughed. He was thirsty. He was hungry. He is the epitome of the model for us. Not the perfection we can't reach, the humanity that we can aspire to. And in this passage, the humanity is saying we have the potential and the obligation, responsibility to grow and to evolve. What we think we've learned, we lock down. We're static. It's not dynamic. We feel like we've accumulated all the knowledge. Now we can decipher through the lens of our own lives everything around us. And there are moments clear when Jesus is saying to be a human being is to grow, to evolve, to change, to be transformed by it. How do we follow Jesus? I think it's simple. What he's saying is take the time to sit and listen, talk to somebody. Because we always talk around people, we talk at them, we talk about them. How often do we actually sit down and talk with them to get to know their hearts, not to try to make our case, to make sure we're right and they're wrong, but to listen carefully, even if we end up disagreeing, to say, I value you, you're a human being, I want to hear more than just what I see on the surface. And we're not really good at listening, are we? We listen, but we don't hear. We look, but we don't see. We touch, but we don't feel. To do that is to understand, to care, to have some level of appreciation for another person. So the way is to be able to listen to that, to discern it as well. And also to listen for mercy, because I love this passage. What is she asking for? Not asking for everything. When he says, why would I give bread to the dogs? She said, even the dogs under the table deserve crumbs under the table. It's an incredible statement. God, I'm not asking you for everything. I'm not even asking anything for me. I just want a little bit of grace, a little bit of healing for the love that I have for my daughter. And every once in a while in our lives, that's what we got. We want everything. We think, God, what I really want is just a little bit, just a glimpse of hope, just a slice of goodness, just a little crumb of mercy and goodness. And we think in terms of this incredible, over-the-top, miraculous, supernatural. No, how about just the littlest thing in the world is to give somebody a cup of cold water or to say a nice word or to bring healing, just a little crumb for people who are starving for God's love, starving for some level of hope in this world. And a lot of us in the darkest moments of our lives have literally survived on the crumbs under the table, and much to our great surprise, the crumbs were enough to give us hope, to feed us, to get us back up on our feet. Jesus suddenly sees her not as a foreigner, not as a woman, not as the other, not as a stranger, not even as a dog. Sees her as a child of God who deserves God's love and mercy. And in that moment, you sense, if you want to track this and follow it, that Jesus learns something, grows through it, enlarges his heart to encapsulate all the people around who came for the house of Israel, but now will come for the world, and that includes every single one of us. To see that it wasn't just for her, that she opened his eyes in some way because he couldn't see it. Because he grows up in a culture that says, those people are inferior, you're superior, you're a male, nothing belongs here. And then he begins to see something that God wants him to understand, to fulfill the mission that he has in this world. But it starts with understanding where we've been wrong. Washington, D.C., a man is in the subway system. He's off to the side. He's got a little violin. It's got an open case. Sits down on a chair, starts playing the violin. And everybody's commuting. They're going back and forth, begins to play. It sounds beautiful. A couple of people stop, about 6 people, but everybody else just rushes past. He's got the case open. Somebody throws $1. A couple of other people do. By the end of his time, it's got about $32. But nobody even really notices them. They hear it, they appreciate it, but they've got things to do, and there's just another person begging in the subway, Washington, D.C. The problem was, the man's name was Joshua Bell, one of the greatest concert violinists in the world. The other part is he's playing not a violin, he's playing a Stradivarius. It's worth almost $4 million. And nobody sees it because it makes no sense. Why is he in a subway? He's just a beggar. But if they knew, they would have stopped and they would have just put aside everything and listened to the music. Maybe the way in which God actually changes, the moment you and I are actually changed, begins with 3 words: I was wrong. And the great history of the church, which we have now begun to neglect because nobody thinks they're ever wrong about anything, is confession. Confession is the beginning of restoring our relationship with God and with other people. Oh, God, forgive me, I was wrong. And every prayer ought to have an element of confession because you and I are wrong almost every single day about something. We hope we get the big things right. We hope we're not wrong about those things, but every day we go through life, we're going to miss something because our eyes are closed, our hearts are closed. We just see things on the surface. To say I was wrong about that person. I see now what I didn't see before. I know now what I didn't know before. I was wrong about that person because all I did was look at everything on the surface. I was wrong. It's the beginning of true wisdom. So somebody a long time ago put this story in the gospel because they wanted us to read it and they wanted us to wrestle with it. And it's a hard passage. But if you're willing to look for it, because I'm not sure Mark really gets the feeling that we're all going to get it, but he puts it in there in the hope that we will. And if you want to hear something else different, just to affirm it, what he's trying to say is how blind we are and things we can't see and our inability to admit that we're wrong. If you go back and you look at this passage, always look at what follows and what comes before it, and it'll tell you a great deal. So when Mark's finished telling this story about a woman who finds crumbs just enough to heal her daughter under the table, and Jesus now is larger in terms of mission and heart and understanding, what's the story he tells right after that? Jesus goes out and heals a man who is deaf, who cannot hear. And he opens up his ears so that it can open up his heart. And if you can connect the dots that way, you will understand why this passage is here. Let all who have ears hear the gospel.